So if we talk stylistically about what our goals are with the wines at Swiftwater Cellars, it's really a style that Tony set and that mirrors very much the winemaking that I've done my entire career, which is to make wines that are balanced, that have finesse, but at the same time, particularly in the red wines, can have some power there, so that they're interesting and they're layered. But again, we always come back to balance. The tannins don't stick out, the acid doesn't stick out, the oak doesn't stick out. Everything's in complete harmony with each other. Achieving that all really starts in the vineyard. So hi, I'm Linda Trotta. I am the on-site winemaker for Swiftwater Cellars in Cle Elum. We're not in Cle Elum today. We're in the Horse Heaven Hills in a vineyard called Zephyr Ridge, which is a vineyard owned by Don and Lori Watts. So the block that we're standing in right now is Cabernet Sauvignon, and we will harvest this entire block here, which is roughly 7 acres, for Swiftwater Cellars. Tony Reinders, who's our consulting winemaker and who's been with the Swiftwater project from its inception, really did a lot of the groundwork and put the plan together for the fruit that we would source. And we source fruit from all over the Columbia Valley, including places like Red Mountain and Walla Walla. And this particular block caught Tony's attention primarily because of its exposure and the row orientation. So if you can see behind me, you can see that we are overlooking the Columbia River. And so we're facing pretty nearly due south with some western exposure, which is an ideal exposure for wine grapes, particularly Cabernet Sauvignon. There are multiple varieties planted over these 300 acres, and the decisions that go into what varieties to plant where and how much and with what aspect is a really complex one, and there's a lot of factors that go into that, including not only sun exposure but drainage of the soil, makeup of the soil, and ultimately when you're looking at what variety to plant, it's what does the consumer want, what is there a market for. If you look at the way these rows are planted and you look at where the sun is, we're at about 3:40 in the afternoon in late August, and the goal is that there be speckled sunlight, filtered sunlight on the clusters all day long. And particularly in the heat of the day, we don't want direct sunlight on the grapes, primarily because we don't want the fruit to sunburn. That impacts the tannins in the skins, it impacts the flavors, it impacts the ultimate quality of the wine. And so by having these rows planted in the orientation that they are, at the height of the season, in the heat of the day, most of the fruit is in the protection of shade from the leaves, but there is just enough sunlight going through to help ripen and mature the fruit. Each ultimate berry starts out as a little cluster of flowers, and so we monitor the bloom and make sure that the vine is in good balance at that point. The next key event is what's happening now, which is called veraison. And veraison is most notable for the fact that it's when the grapes turn from green to purple. And then we're talking about red fruit here. So this Cabernet Sauvignon is well into what we call veraison. So what happens at veraison is up until that point, the vine is all about growing. It's all about making leaves to make photosynthesis to ripen the fruit. Once we hit this physiological stage of veraison, the vine shifts gear and it no longer sends its energy to growing leaves. It's now sending all of its energy to ripen the fruit. And from a grapevine standpoint, its entire goal in life is to get the fruit as good looking and as good tasting as possible for birds to feast on it and spread the seeds and repropagate, which is exactly the opposite of what we want as winemakers and wine growers. We want the vine to hold on to that fruit. We don't want the birds to get it, and we want it to taste a certain way. And so there's some manipulations that we can do with irrigation and with the canopy to coax out those flavors and characters that we want. So as Tony and I have gone around and selected vineyard sites, we're looking for vineyard sites that will work well with each other, that will complement each other, but also that are different enough that they add layers of interest to the wine. You know, here the fruit here that grows on Zephyr Ridge has a nice richness to it. The tannins are a little bit more structured than some of our other sites, and there's a nice bright fruit quality to it. And the fruit, say, that we get from Red Mountain vineyards are very, very structured and very dark and very rich. And when you layer those together with a couple of the other sites we have, they start to build upon each other, and rather than just being a singular experience, when you drink the wine, it just keeps building on each other, and your first sip is very different from your last sip. And that's what we're trying to do when we're building the wines of Swiftwater. Thanks for joining me here at Zephyr Ridge. I'll see you back at the winery.